Oh yes, Shrek, that lovable ogre dreamworks spawned back in June 2001. The subject has countless memes, franchising attempts, merchandising as well as scrutiny if we're going to talk about the third movie at least. Shrek has had a profound impact on DreamWorks as an animation studio, but alas, with the last Shrek related movie being Puss in Boots released in 2011, it seemed all hope was lost for this beloved franchise. That was up until The Last Wish arrived to save the day, shattering expectations for what the Shrek universe should be and even catapulting a great director such as Joel Crawford forth in his quest to further fill out the Shrek universe. But how did this come to be? How did The Last Wish out of all films unintentionally age Shrek in the process? Join me, for today we're exploring The Last Wish and the Shrek revival. Long before The Last Wish was conceived, Shrek 5 was stuck in development hell. It was a film that was proposed soon after the events of the fourth movie, but the fact that Shrek Forever After was supposed to be the final film in the Shrek franchise really threw off those that were meant to be working on the project. Not only that, the acquisition of DreamWorks shook up the team as well as the projects that were supposedly going to be working on. As mentioned before, the last Shrek related film other than Shrek Forever After was Puss in Boots, a spin-off featuring one of Shrek's most popular side characters, and it was an exploration into the life of Puss as a character and the affairs he found himself dealing with. Prior to The Last Wish, it had been an 11-year wait for anything Shrek related, and it seemed as if the death of the franchise was imminent. Not only that, DreamWorks during this time took a rather confusing approach to their animated project following the release of Kung Fu Panda 3, which is the last movie they developed with full creative autonomy before standing down to listen to some of the ideas and suggestions that NBC Universal made for the company. This is how DreamWorks briefly spawned franchises such as The Trolls and Boss Baby. NBC kept treating the studio like Illumination, and it further fizzled out hope for a new Shrek-related franchise entry. But then, as all hope was beginning to wane, a new shockwave rose from beyond the horizon, and that happened to be Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Not only did this come as a shock to loyal DreamWorks fans, it came as a shock to many who consider the franchise of Shrek to be dead to some extent. I mean, this is a time where Shrek was starting to become nostalgic, and the same goes for Puss in Boots as a movie in general. If you want a true example of it, this is as if Kung Fu Panda 3 came out in 2022 after Kung Fu Panda 2 had been released 11 years prior in 2011. This was as long as an abstinence and break DreamWorks took with Shrek, almost as if the wait was intentional. Aha! That's where the magic behind The Last Wish truly lies. Whilst the world was beginning to move on from everything, Shrek's nostalgia value started to skyrocket as everyone considered it was over, whilst giving DreamWorks valuable time to not only go through the countless ideas but to educate their incoming directors and those that have been working amidst their ranks for some time. Now, this is mostly assumption, but I assume as more time went on, those who were responsible for the final set of Shrek films started to improve their skills whilst gaining insight on Shrek itself, coming up with new ideas as the actual creator of this beloved franchise itself, and allowing them to flesh out those ideas so they wouldn't disappoint their eager audiences. Soon enough, with all that time and patience, The Last Wish became much more than just a revival movie. It became a passion project. Whenever working with this high level of a passion, there is bound to be an exceptional level of quality that soon follows, and that shows within the quirks, animation, story, writing, and the amount of they managed to pull off inside of this movie. Now, I'm saving that for the following chapter, but to put it into perspective and to simplify everything, DreamWorks 100% waited for people to grow older, to become much more nostalgic for Shrek and Puss in Boots, to harness their creativity and passion to create one of the best animated movies we've ever seen the studio release. It was such a successful strategy, intentional or not, although I like to think it was done on purpose, to the point where Disney quite a while back came out and said they were going to be making sequels to some of their most beloved franchises. This ability to harness nostalgia value and to create something awesome is most likely what ensured the skyrocketing of The Last Wish's popularity, as people had something they could watch in their childhood, but most importantly, with 11 years being roughly the same time for another new generation to lapse into watching Shrek and Puss in Boots, it gave DreamWorks the advantages of having two generations of franchise lovers to work with, therefore bolstering their box office yields as well as social media popularity, as this film resonated across the internet and in the minds of many. Unlike other companies that capture nostalgia and use their nostalgia value to create a much worse film remastered several decades later, Disney! DreamWorks genuinely poured their heart and soul into almost every single aspect inside of The Last Wish, and that makes their abstinence as well as their hiatus from anything Shrek related that much more immaculate. The fact they were able to come back, release a masterpiece, and then capture the attention of so many people despite it being a long time further adds to the incredible nature of The Last Wish and how it revives Shrek as a franchise to the point where we may get a Shrek 5 at some point. However, speaking of Shrek and The Last Wish, I think it's time I move on to the second portion of this video, and that happens to regard the aforementioned mastery that went into this film. Now, I know I'm super late when it comes to The Last Wish, considering I founded my channel last month, and I know that tons of commentary YouTubers and ordinary people will have much to say about this movie, so I'm sorry if you heard some of this before, but allow me to dive into the animation first. I've actually spoken about this style of animation twice before, so I've got a bit of experience summing this up, but if there's one word I must get out that wraps up The Last Wish, it has to be pure perfection. The style they chose for this movie feels a lot less like a traditional 3D animated film and more like an experience. I love the brush painted style, the way that some things pop out against the background, the extremely mild use of motion blur, instead of preferring to use something known as motion smearing for some of the scenes as well. The animation fluctuation and frame rate and pace is something that speaks to my soul as well. Take the battle between Puss and the sleeping giant of Delamar for example. Not only does the weather change and the time change around him, but the animation style emulates something more akin to a comic book as opposed to being something that's more 3D based. Plus the 2D elements truly pop up to me as well. Ah yes, I couldn't go over all of this without summing up the character design. This is an incredibly strange thing to point out to sum up the animation behind all this, but I really love the way that Puss and Kitty softballs are animated. It's almost like they seriously improved since the last Puss in Boots movie. Their animations feel a lot more natural compared to the previous movie, and I really love how DreamWorks managed to balance out the more feline-esque elements of the movement style with anthropomorphism. Plus I've even noticed that some of the characters even have their own animation style as well. Whilst Purito is more playful, Kitty softballs is more suave and fluid with her moves, while Puss's animations fluctuate. At first he's quite scruffy and does things his own way, then he becomes more cautious and cowardly before he emulates an animation style more similar to Kitty softballs, silently highlighting the fact that through their bonding sessions with one another, Puss has learned to control himself and to finally deliver when it comes to his combat with death. I'm going to add to my previous point about this movie's animation by saying the scenery style of this movie is absolutely breathtaking and blew me away once I saw it for the first time. I get that in the end there's a huge battle on the wishing star for the wish itself, but I've got to admit the whole contrast between the forest being dead on paper compared to having a life of its own is super unique as well as outstanding. I'm pretty sure almost everyone's got their own theory regarding the sentience of the forest, but my own interpretation of it is the fact that it matches the things you push down. With Puss dealing with the emotional inferno of being on his last life, Kitty being a little bitter thanks to her loneliness and somewhat closed off attitude, while Purito gets it easy with the fact that all he's decided in his life is friendship and sort of sees the positivity in everything that happens to him and to those around him. If we're going to discuss character designs though, even if we're talking about a magical forest at this moment, we must also discuss the absolute madness that is Death and the other villains. DreamWorks made Death an absolute monster, whether it would be the voice they chose for him, the size difference between him and Puss, the design of his muzzle, his eyes or his weaponry, or the backstory behind him and the grand chase for Puss's 9th life. They did an absolutely outstanding job with crafting a villain that somehow managed to blend into the background while simultaneously stealing the spotlight. I mean, just look at those teeth! They're gigantic. The same goes for his chaotic attitude, where he's casual and easygoing in one moment and then suddenly explosive the next. This is just Death we're talking about here. A much needed addition to the backstory of Puss in Boots, considering this movie also establishes the fact that a major yet subtle time skip has occurred between the original Puss in Boots and also the sequel. In my opinion, Death is more or less the representation of consequence, at least consequence for how carelessly Puss lived through his previous 8 lives before moving on to his final 9th. Puss during that time felt his head swell with the fact he wanted to become the legend or a legend, and that made him quite the risk taker. Therefore he was unwilling to accept the fact that he wasn't invincible, and Death chasing him down to claim his 9th is the epitome of consequence, at least by living a life full of fame and glory whilst dodging the consequences that come with no longer living. Death is terrifying as a concept in general, but as an anthropomorphic villain, god damn! If I were Puss in this situation and I've forgotten to appreciate much in my life, always taking risks and gambling my own existence away, I'm just gonna put it out there, as someone with thanatophobia, I would be terrified of this guy, and Death's ability to merely exist yet to push Puss into valuing his one and only life, the life that he should have been spending alongside, say, Kitty Softballs, or instead retiring after living as the legend of Puss in Boots for so long, makes his presence that much more satisfying, considering he may be a representation of consequence, but he nonchalantly influences Puss into becoming a better person, even if it is through fear. The fact that Death spares Puss after saying that he can no longer see the legend within him, and the fact he's chasing him down makes this culmination even more satisfying and bittersweet, especially when the pair of them mention to one another and meet one another once again, but this time, Death seems to accept the fact that the time will come when the bell tolls for Puss in Boots, at least the bell that will ring across the entirety of Iberia. All of the main trio of characters that represent the protagonists balance one another out as complement one another with their respective attitudes. I've even got to give major props to DreamWorks for representing an anxiety attack in such a relatable yet simultaneously creative way, with Perito calming Puss down as he endures vision of Death chasing him down and eventually catching up to him. Kitty has a no given attitude but is soft in the heart. Puss is panicking because this is his last life and he fears betraying Kitty once again, whilst Perito is just kind of vibing in my opinion, appreciating their presence and their friendship, which is unbelievably wholesome. But alas, we must take a trip away from the wholesomeness to talk about Jack Horner. If we're going to talk about an absolute psychopath who doesn't give a fuck about his surroundings or the consequences that comes from his actions, it's got to be Jack Horner. The dude had 2 loving parents, yet envied the fact he grew up somewhere in which magic was prevalent and he wished to rob it from everyone by stealing various magical artifacts in the hope of attaining the scroll of the wishing star so he could have all the magic for himself. Talk about being materialistic, goddamn. I love how they didn't give Jack Horner a redemption arc though. It's still his attitude honestly deserves to say the way it is, considering I deem his character kind of irredeemable. His chance of redemption was robbed from him the moment he stopped appreciating his upbringing and the fact he had a baking enterprise in his back pocket. Not a lot of people get to say they're a child of a successful baking enterprise, but the one thing he yearns for is attention. If I had to compare him to Death's purely menacing aura and representation of consequence for Puss's recklessness in his previous lives, Jack Horner just straight up doesn't care. Death or no death, he'll work for his own benefit, even though it doesn't mean taking a penny with him to the afterlife, and I think that makes his soullessness even more charming. Also, my goodness, is Jack Horner's design slightly intimidating. I know he's supposed to be a big dude, but in spite of the weight, he's truly talented when it comes to using some of his weapons. I say some because I know that man had trouble whipping out his Excalibur sword from his magic nanny bag, and that struggle was highlighted before he eventually managed to whip Goldilocks and the 3 bears off the trail that they were travelling on. Although speaking of Goldilocks and the 3 bears, I think it's time to talk about the villain who redeems herself and finds her family within this movie in such a pure and delicate way. I love the spin they put on Goldilocks and the 3 bears alongside the original tale. How Goldie stole their hearts when they looked upon her for the very first time when she was young. At first, when I watched the movie, I found what happened to Goldie and the attitude she had developed to be slightly tragic, as it's clear that Mama Bear had taken care of her kindly and well. Bears were more or less unconditionally supporting her the entire time with a whole crime syndicate fantasy, as in one way or another, it drew them together as a family. The writing behind Goldie and just this movie in general is the epitome of excellence and honestly has been the zenith of DreamWorks animation so far, and the way they handle the backstory with such care whilst making it their own is something that will live on in my heart forever. Goldie was just a girl who wanted a family. She couldn't see a family within the bears because they looked so different compared to her, and she seemed to lead them all. Yet, in the end, she learns that her true family was the family she was alongside the entire time. I do feel extremely bad for Mama Bear though. Like, she's raised Goldilocks this entire time, and as a mother, I'm sure it would never feel good for a child of hers, adopted or not, to want a better family. It can be disheartening and degrading to hear that as a mother, but yet she still agreed to do it to make Goldie happy, and it goes to really show how unconditional motherly support is. And in the end, through all this strife, may I add, she finds out her true family has been with her the entire time, and that makes everything so much more wholesome. Human or not, she's done some awesome things with these bears, and I doubt any real family, especially now that she's probably in her early 20s or mid 20s, could give her any form of benefit whatsoever, at least emotionally. She's an adult clinging on to this childish fantasy of hers, thanks to the fact she was unable to see the love that the bears were showering her with until she realised how motivated Mama Bear was, not to mention all the other bears and their willingness to help her as well. Man, this movie is an absolute masterpiece and will certainly go down in the history books for quite some time. This is genuinely the first movie where I've seen 3 separate antagonists somewhat held as a counterbalance to the protagonist, where it worked without everything becoming too convoluted or complicated. In a way, I see a bit of a contrast between Jack Horner and Perito as well. Perito had no family and was raised in a presumably abusive household where he was chucked into a river, but Jack Horner had it all. Yet the pair of them ended up leading 2 completely separate lives based on 2 different perspectives. In some way, Perito found peace within himself early on, as he had no one to compare himself to, whilst Jack Horner always compared himself to magic magic, and it's that magic that eventually brought Horner to his demise, thankfully. However, this movie's mastery was a slow burn at first, as many people were skeptical when it came to watching it. Allow me to take you on one final chapter's worth of journey to explain how this movie's mastery echoed across the globe and how The Last Wish became a beloved movie for many DreamWorks fans. There is truly one phrase that brings The Last Wish and the Shrek revival into existence, and that's the fact that they made Puss in Boots ASMR. DreamWorks went all out on the promotion of this movie, and it was something that I've never seen a movie studio do with so much passion before. This wasn't any cheaply animated commercial stuff, this was free content for those who were super excited about The Last Wish, and there's no doubt that dipping their toes into several parts of the internet in such an elegant way was a genius decision made by them to further captivate that audience, primarily filled with nostalgia like I mentioned earlier. Not only did they go all in for Puss in Boots themed ASMR, Puss also made an animated appearance on a Hot Ones video, something I saw as an exceptional success for both the hosts and Hot Ones as well as DreamWorks, considering Hot Ones is one of those shows that you can enjoy a massive catalogue of, and it's also one of the most entertaining shows I've ever watched regarding individuals alike. There was even an advertisement made themed around Goldie and the Three Bears ordering concessions from the cinema stand in just the right way. I think DreamWorks honestly nailed the relatability with their marketing team and with their promotional movies, and the fact that they were sat there and some memes even spawned from it, such as, "Hey, want to see something cool?" from the trailer, really goes to show how immense that relatability and passion shone within the movie itself. To me, this film was obviously based on Puss in Boots and the Shrek franchise, but I also love how independent it feels as a movie as well. They didn't force the fact that this was related to, say, Shrek. They more or less allowed it to flourish by itself while subtly hinting at the previous films, and I think that subtle alongside creative marketing really made this movie stand out amidst everything else. Not only that, but my goodness, did the whole social media craze of some of the soundtracks, and especially Death as a character, really assist in getting the word of mouth about this movie out there. I was one of the people who personally had my head dug into the sound for a while because I already considered the Shrek franchise to be over, but then I saw some of the promotional material, heard some reviews from my friends who thought if this is similar to The Bad Guys in the form of creativity and relates to Shrek, then I must watch this. This is one of those things I feel is important to mention, is the fact that DreamWorks had 2 or potentially 3 generations of Shrek enjoying individuals, if you include parents as well, to pull from and to pull in people who are fond of the original movies. The fact that social media is, well, not really a recent thing, but more or less social media platforms that we use are basically a decade old nowadays, but it's basically a current generation sort of thing. This wildfire and word of mouth of one generation spreading around social media for the other 2 to enjoy whenever they logged in would probably amplify the promotion of the movie, and there's no doubt that this was thanks to the effort that DreamWorks poured into the animation side of The Last Wish. Not only did DreamWorks do an outstanding job of the marketing of this movie, but I would also like to mention the fact that they wrapped up the ending of this movie super well, and how it could technically be seen as anticipation and promoting of the long-awaited Shrek 5. I mentioned Shrek 5 at the beginning of the video, and if you're still watching this, hello, you're amazing, but I thought I'd talk in depth about it now, considering this movie does an excellent job of promoting the Shrek franchise at the end to sum everything up. Not everyone has considered the Shrek franchise dead. I've more or less seen it as a dormant franchise, but this movie has definitely skyrocketed the Shrek franchise into prominence once again, and this personally satisfies my soul as well as those who I know who have personally watched this movie. The Last Wish has opened up countless avenues for Shrek and Joel Crawford, the director of The Last Wish, and he recently opened up by saying he wanted to explore more opportunities inside of the Shrek universe, which is potentially hinting at a Shrek 5 or some form of Shrek related spin-off. I just want Me Familiar to be reunited with one another once again. Fiona, Shrek, Donkey and Puss, Kitty and Burrito. Both Puss and Shrek have their own families now, and it would be really lovely to see a Shrek 5 in which both families somewhat reunite with one another for a homecoming style of film, where there's one more massive challenge that they must face before ending off the Shrek franchise for good. Yet, as for now, I consider this movie to be the beginning of the Shrek revival, and it's set in stone that Shrek will exist as an innovative franchise for a long time, judging by the fact that The Last Wish grossed $500 million in the international box office. Hopefully The Last Wish is the beginning of the long-awaited Shrek revival. Another generation deserves to grow up with Shrek-related movies and franchising, or one Shrek-related movie that's more or less a reunion movie between Puss and Shrek's respective families. I wouldn't mind if it's called something separate from Shrek 5. I don't think Shrek 5 would do Shrek Forever After enough justice, but it's undeniable that The Last Wish has brought new life into Shrek and has jump-started the revival of the franchise. Alas, the future is uncertain and my conclusion has arrived. Thank you so much for watching this video and for your never-ending support. We've recently reached 50 subscribers and I couldn't be more thankful. If you've got anything to share about The Last Wish and the Shrek revival, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. Take care, have a lovely day, and may the cosmos shine upon you. Bye!